Speed round. I'll give you a name or a topic. Just give me one word that comes to mind. Bob Lazar.
True.
Welcome to Second Earth Alternative. This is Felipe Osorio. It's been almost 2 months since our last episode. For those who thought that the channel has shut down, no, I'm still here. I'm reporting to you from south of the continent, still in Brazil. And today I want to talk about Bob Lazar and why I believe that Bob Lazar is actually telling the truth. The reason why I'm making this episode is because this morning I was on Amy's channel. Amy, you might know her as Alien Girl 111. She used to be a regular viewer in the Second Earth channel. Now I say, of course, used to be because I haven't been posting lately. But when I was chatting away at her live feed, I was kind of taken back by the amount of people who just simply didn't believe that Bob Lazar was telling the truth. I thought that the consensus was that, yeah, the guy is telling the truth. I thought there were a lot more people who were on board with the idea that this man may have actually back-engineered a flying saucer craft from the S4, which is adjacent to Area 51 in Papoose Lake. So that kind of shocked me a little bit. I was like, man, I thought that Bob Lazar was just one of those things that most of the UFO community had affirmed is real. But I guess, like anything else in this modern day, there's hardly an agreement with anything. So just to kind of preface, I'm not trying to claim by making this episode that my opinion is any better than anybody else's opinion. It's just my perspective, as simple as that. And maybe there's something that you can take out of it. Maybe there's something that I can learn from the discussions regarding Bob Lazar. So before we get started, I just want to kind of give you an update of what's going on with my life. You know, I'm no different than any of you in a sense that I have to have a real job. I have both a full-time job that I work remotely for the US, but at the same time, I'm also still trying to produce this film. I'm, working on the edit room. I'm working with the director, trying to get this thing out. If you're wondering why I haven't been posting, that's basically it. I've been doing 20-hour days, trying to get this movie out, trying to keep myself afloat with a job. But look, things are going really well. The film is looking absolutely terrific. Anyways, enough about the film. So let's talk about Bob Lazar. Okay, so here's the deal. Bob Lazar, there are a few things that make me kind of unsure about his case. His claim about element 115, the idea that an element's that high, I mean, Joe Rogan used to be like, oh, Bob Lazar predicted that there was going to be an element that didn't exist at the time. And it's like, bro, I mean, any elements, like I could say element 117, they're going to discover that, or I think they might have already discovered that. These elements, they're discovered in these big labs. They last only like a flicker of a second. So to say that there's a stable isotope for element 115, I'm not a scientist, but that seems hard to believe. We have not discovered that yet. So that's one claim that I think is somewhat dubious. Look, I tutored science for high school students. So my level of physics, my level of chemistry, of just general sciences is basically a level where I can tutor high school students, but I never really took any classes beyond that. So I can't judge whether the claim that Bob Lazar makes about the weak nuclear force of the atom interacting with the gravity field and thus creating some kind of gravitational space-time like bubble that they are able to blow it up around the craft. I don't know. I have no idea whether that's even feasible, whether that's possible. What I can say is that the mechanisms to which he described how the craft moves, which, if I understood it correctly, he kind of talked about how you create this space-time bubble kind of around the craft, and then you can extend the bubble. Let's say you extend it like a mile long, and then you just pop that bubble. So then the object goes from point A to point B in a split seconds. So it's like a split second that it takes for it to go a mile. Technically not traveling through the highway of space-time continuum, but kind of like popping in and out of existence, which may be a means of traveling without violating the speed of light. And what I did find kind of interesting is because I've been reading about Bob Lazar since 2001. So it's been like 20 years since I've been following his case. And he's been talking about this for quite some time. And it's only recently that scientists, physicists began talking about concepts, mathematical concepts of warp drives. And their warp drives is not that different from the concept that Bob Lazar had. I think with warp drives, they're kind of bending space in a donut-like shape. And Bob Lazar is doing the same thing. It's bending space. It's using gravity as a main source of being able to activate high distances at very low speeds. So basically, if you can control gravity, you can do very spooky things that you only see in science fiction. This is something that Bob Lazar has reiterated multiple times, but it was kind of cool to see that his mechanisms of how to do a warp drive seem to match or seem to be similar to the concepts that were later theorized after he had already discussed the mechanisms to which he believes the UFOs use to travel. So yeah, so I thought those were kind of the idea that the element can be a stable isotope, the idea of the weak nuclear force interacting with the high gravity of element 115, creating some kind of vacuum in space-time. All of that, I can't confirm if that's true. So those are the things that to me are most dubious about the claims that Bob Lazar makes. However, the things that make me believe that Bob Lazar is telling the truth, I think they're pretty strong points. So first of all, I wanted to talk about Bob Lazar's claim that he worked at Los Alamos. Now, I think this is actually really interesting because most people feel that the fact that he has a lack of records is means to disprove his claims. But I actually see it in the opposite way. I think that Bob Lazar claiming that he had worked at Los Alamos and people not being able to figure out his records, and then suddenly his name shows up on the phone book. Now that I think is interesting. The fact that apparently people who works at Los Alamos recognize Bob Lazar. I'm not sure if it was with George Knapp, but I think Bob Lazar did a tour in Los Alamos and there were people who were like, hey Bob, like they knew who he was. So the fact that Bob Lazar claimed that he worked at Los Alamos and then nobody could find any records of him, but then there were physical proof like the phone book that somebody with the name Bob Lazar had worked there, I think that's really interesting because it's not only proving that Bob Lazar may have been telling the truth, but it also goes to showcase the power to which is consuming his existence. Talking about the government power, the ability for somebody to go up to him and erase his records. The fact that he claims he worked somewhere, nobody believed him, nobody could find his records, but then finally we can find proof. I think that is more proof of what he's telling is the truth, because who would go out of their way to erase his records? This man must have done something extraordinary for the government to actually make the proactive approach to try to delete somebody. Secondly, like I said, I've been following Bob Lazar since 2001. Never once seen Bob Lazar change his story. Maybe the one thing that he kind of changed a little bit was the idea of the aliens, because I think he initially said that he might have seen something that might have been an alien, and then he kind of backtracked his thoughts and said, well, you know, maybe it was like a doll or something like that. So I don't even think that that's a real inconsistency in his theory. I think that's just a form of skepticism running through his head and him trying to make himself more believable by being more skeptical of what he may have seen, but is not certain about. So I don't see anything wrong with that claim changing, but outside of that, everything that Bob Lazar has mentioned has been super consistent for over 30 years. Now, some people claim that he made a toy, that maybe he gained something out of this, but from the most part, from the things that I've seen, I don't see the guy really gaining much from telling this story. At least not prior to Jeremy Corbell's documentary. I don't know what their financial dealings were with that movie, but the fact that he hasn't changed his story much, I really think is something to consider, and the fact that he's not gaining much from it. In fact, if you watch Jeremy Corbell's documentary on Bob Lazar, didn't you think it was kind of interesting that the FBI and all these other government organizations had raided his place at the same time that they were making a documentary? I mean, just think about that. If the guy is absolutely full of shit, then he would obviously not be bothered. The government wouldn't bother him. They wouldn't try to erase his records. They wouldn't be raiding his house. The fact that they raided his house and they actually have video proof of this, I mean, for the skeptics, I mean, how do you explain that? Why would that happen if the guy wasn't being somewhat honest about what he had gone through? I think one of the strongest points is the relationship that him and George Knapp have had, because George Knapp was just a regular investigative journalist. He wasn't a UFO researcher. It was his interaction with Bob Lazar that convinced him that this phenomenon might actually be real. So Bob Lazar's case was so convincing that he was actually able to get investigative journalists like George Knapp on board with the UFO concept, with the idea that UFOs might actually be real. But going even beyond that, I think the most critical aspect of the story was the fact that Bob Lazar claimed that there was this area that they could go to that was technically public, that they would be able to watch some of the test flights that they were doing. And sure enough, not only did Bob Lazar showcase UFOs to, I think, John Lear, George Knapp, I think there might have been a third person there, I forgot who it was. But the fact that it wasn't even the fact that they witnessed it, it was the fact that they actually videotaped this. So we have the Department of Defense saying that we have objects that seem to defy the laws of physics, and so it can't be human-made. Yet Bob Lazar is there at Area 51, a US government base, showcasing objects that seemingly break the laws of physics, or at least some of the conventions of aerodynamics. Whatever the proportion is of this object, it's something very exotic. Now, whether it can do what we see with other UFOs where they seem to break the laws of inertia, and I say this because when you change speeds at 1,000 miles per hour, we're not even talking about just the occupants, the actual structural integrity of the craft. There is no material, there's no titanium strong enough to withstand such forces. So these objects are obviously breaking the laws of inertia. Now, whether the object that Bob Lazar showed hovering over Area 51 was actually doing this, I don't know. But the fact that he claims that he worked at this base and he can showcase that there were UFOs there is I think, a pretty convincing element of why Bob Lazar might actually be telling the truth. Something else is I believe that Bob Lazar has made claims that were later verified. I think Bob Lazar was talking about that when he was working for, I don't know if it was Los Alamos or another organization, that there were biometric features where they had to physically put their hands in this like metal type of device. And the way that Bob Lazar described the device was very specific, and it was something that nobody had known about, nobody had pictures of, they had no witnesses of such devices. But apparently Jeremy Corbell had found this exact device, or a photo of this exact device. Now, I forgot exactly how he found it, but if you watch his documentary, you'll see that things that Bob Lazar talked about that nobody seemed to know at the time was decades later confirmed to be real. Now, the next 2 points might be points that you have never heard of before. So I'll start off like this. Since I've been making this channel, I've received 2 different death threats. One of them was very serious because somebody literally put a bullet in my doorstep that was marked. I talked to police officers. I talked to the son of a police officer the other day, And I showed him the pictures of the bullet, and he's like, bro, that bullet is marked. He's like, that's not to make the bullets, I thought it was to make the bullets explosive. And he's like, no, that's not to make the bullets explosive. That's to say that you are marked. And he told me that his father, when he was working in Chicago, they would encounter this very often, that his father was talking about how certain individuals would get these bullets that had this like little cross, which meant that the person's marked. So yes, I received a bullet like that. The things that I said on that particular episode, now I don't want to get into too much detail because after that bullet, I lost my wife, my YouTube channel got demonetized 3 days later, I ended up moving to Mexico, and then afterwards I moved to Brazil. So to say that it changed my life would be a understatement. But it was, it's very real. What happened to me, and that in the episode that was related, now I know exactly what episode, because not only was it the most recent episode, but I had actually published that exact episode on Odyssey. And Odyssey is a decentralized platform. Nobody can take down the video, and my video had 0 views. Like, I don't have an audience in Odyssey. I never use it. I just put out the video in a way that nobody can take it down, kind of as a form of protection. I didn't care about the views. But I found it interesting that the video had 0 views, but a comment in the bottom. And what was the comment? Well, somebody said it would be torture to lose you. So imagine you receive a bullet in your doorstep, it's marked, and then you put that same video on a different platform and somebody says it would be torture to lose you. The comment got deleted a couple weeks later. The account that made that comment was kind of like a shell account. There was no history with that account. It's as if somebody just created an account and then dumped it right away. So that was pretty serious. For those who don't know about that aspect of my life, that was really shitty. But there was one other death threat that I got before that. And that death threat was a claimed mercenary who was telling me that he likes me. So he wanted to be clear with me that I'm stepping on landmines, so to speak, that I should be more careful with the information that I'm divulging. And then he even went so far as to say that he knows for a fact that I'm on a list. So I took his YouTube channel, I tried to do some research. I actually was able to backtrack and find his Facebook unbeknownst to him. And yeah, all over his Facebook was his experience as a special forces. So though I can't confirm that he's a mercenary, certainly makes his claim more credible, or at least more probable. But why am I mentioning this death threat? Well, it's because of the episode that I made related to it. And that episode was none other than secret underground bases at Area 51, or S4, around the Papoose Lake area. And so what did I do in the episode? Well, I went on Google Earth and I had this interesting idea to start following the tire tracks. You can actually see the tire tracks in Google Earth, and what's cool is you can go back in time and see if the tire tracks had been there for many years or if it was a recent tire track. There's ways to extrapolate more information by looking back in history and checking the tire tracks. But what I noticed is that there were 2 types of tracks that seemingly led to nowhere. One was a security outlook post. So you'd see a road that seemingly goes out of nowhere, but then it does a little circle. And then you can see like a little patch of land where probably one of those white trucks or some kind of security vehicle stands there and has a good, usually on top of a hill, lookout of the general location, the general area. But there was another type of track. The tracks that seemingly had no loops, just out of nowhere, poof, like magic, just disappeared on the side of the hill. Why are there tracks on the side of the hill that seemingly disappear? I found like 5 or 6 of them around Area 51. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am not kidding you. You can actually, from space, see doorways that are seemingly camouflaged into the hillside. By following tire tracks that seemingly lead nowhere from Google Earth in Area 51, you might actually be able to find secret underground bases. But if you do follow this path, check this out. it ends in what appears to be an underground entrance. And so let's go up in time so you guys can see different perspectives of this entrance. So here is the same entrance from a different date. Here is what we claiming to be an entrance from another date. And here's the same entrance a little bit later. And let's do it just 2016. There we go. Or 2015. Then I started thinking, okay, so Bob Lazar's record gets deleted. I'm getting a death threat for an Area 51 episode where I'm trying to showcase people how to find underground bases. Could this be a form of evidence that there is something to this idea, that there might be underground bases in Area 51? And look, this is not the first time we've heard this claim. John Lear apparently had gone to Area 51, and I think they were kind of going around the area with a boogie. I forget exactly the details of the story, but the general idea is that they went near Papoose Lake, and then suddenly the security came out of nowhere. But it wasn't that the security came out of nowhere. The security came from underground, as if like a door had lifted from underground and they had just stormed in. This is not the first time that we've heard this. And I'm not even talking about Bob Lazar. Have you ever heard of that archaeologist, I forgot his first name, I think his last name is Freeman, that he was trying to follow the 49ers and ended up being one of the few people who snuck into Area 51, but he did so by going the back route, by going trekking for 7 days through the deserts. This guy is not like a UFO researcher. I don't even know if he believes in UFOs. But this guy made mention that at nighttime when he was hiding away at the desert, he noticed lights coming in the middle of the desert as if a door had opened up from underneath. So then we have Bob Lazar, we have John Lear, and then we have this third individual who has nothing to do with UFO research, basically all saying the same thing. So I think all of that is just incredible. The fact that you have all those accounts, it just really makes me believe that maybe what Bob Lazar was saying might have some merit to it. The fact that Area 51 in the surrounding area might actually have underground installations that are difficult to see from above. Now, the last reason is kind of, it's another one of those reasons why I don't think you've probably ever heard, because it has more to do with psychology. The psychological profile of Bob Lazar doesn't make sense. What do I mean by this? Okay, Bob Lazar said that the reason why he decided to reveal all this information was because his wife was cheating on him, that she was another man. Not just that, her flight instructor. I don't know if that makes it any better or worse, or it doesn't matter. The point is that if he had made up this story, the general psychological profile that I imagine of people who make up random stories are either like schizophrenics who are just completely out of left field, they're just complete outlier, there's no way to make sense of anything, or they're like narcissists. There are people who are so consumed with their own ability to deceive people, or maybe they're trolls. Trolls actually tend to be narcissistic. Regardless, the simple idea that somebody would just randomly create this incredible story usually is associated with narcissistic personality disorder. There's nothing about making up a story and saying that the reason why this all happened to me is because my wife, who I loved dearly, was screwing somebody else. It doesn't fit the psychological profile. Narcissists, people who tend to be the type of personalities that would make up a story, would almost certainly make up a story where the details seem to embellish or enhance their selves, their egos. There's nothing about this particular claim where his wife was screwing with a flight instructor, and this is why the people working at Area 51 got concerned and started doing heavier surveillance on him. There's nothing about that detail that makes him look better, that makes him look like some big man. You know, there's nothing egotistical. There's nothing that benefits him in making that claim. So although this might seem very vague, from my understanding of psychology, it just did not make sense that that would be the story that he would pick to explain why he decided to come out and start talking about UFOs. All right, thank you so much for listening in. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.